Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's keynote panel, 2022 Priorities for SAP S/4HANA, Cloud, and Infrastructure. My name is Robert Holland from SAPinsider, and I am talking today with Lee Johnson, Director of Sales Engineering from Virtustream, Sherry Yu, Senior Director and SAP Architect at SUSE, and Jessica Heath, Senior Manager for SAP Sales and Strategy at Red Hat. And what we're going to be talking about is priorities for infrastructure, for SAP S/4HANA, for the cloud, particularly because the last year or so, well, for most of 2021, I think organizations have been looking to get back on track projects that they might have put on hold in 2020. Certainly from an SAPinsider research standpoint, we've seen a lot of things happening with projects starting to move again. We saw quite a few SAP S/4HANA projects, and particularly on hold in 2020. But what we want to do is we sort of want to talk a little bit about what has been happening during 2021 that our panelists have seen in their interactions with customers, SAP customers particularly, and what people should be planning for from a S/4HANA cloud and infrastructure perspective for 2022. So one thing I want to make clear before we start is that when we talk about cloud, we're talking about private or public cloud infrastructure on which organizations are running their SAP workloads. I know that SAP often uses multiple definitions for cloud, but that's what we're going to be talking about when we're talking about cloud. So let's start off with a question basically about what's been happening, what you've seen happening in 2021. So this year, as I said, has been one many organizations have restarted projects that were delayed or impacted by the shift in the work environment. So in your interactions with customers, what have you seen as the most critical projects in the SAP space over the last 12 months? Now, I'm just going to go through from the top left of my screen to the bottom right. So that means Sherry, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Lee and Jessica. So Sherry, what have you seen? What are people doing this year?
So what we have observed is customers continue with the journey to the SAP HANA because there's a deadline, and that SAP keeps reminding people 2027 is not that far from now, right? Because for large organizations, it takes a lot of time to do the planning. And then the actual migration. And before you do the actual migration, it takes time to test the environment. So 2027 is not a time that's far from today. Another trend is during the COVID, a lot of businesses turned into virtual. So the business transformation becomes almost mandatory, for a lot of business to survive. And business who are transformed quickly in response to crises like this, they even thrived. And I have seen customers benefit a lot from this SAP HANA migration, and they saved a cost from, some customer told me that the database after the migration became a quarter size of the old one. And they not only able to save cost from a smaller database, but based on SAP HANA, they are able to enhance the business process. So on the SUSE side, we have been very busy helping customers with this HANA migration, and the cloud has been the most popular destination.
Robert, you're on mute.
Take a shot. So Lee, does that correlate with what you've been seeing with your customer interactions?
Yes, there's still a drive and a passion to enhance the core ERP that's with a number of our customers. A number of our customers at Virtustream are still running the legacy versions, right? And my customer has a different approach to it. Their transformation, whether it's going to be digital or enterprise, is really starting at the infrastructure level, right? And the infrastructure level with the cloud capability, characteristics of elasticity, scalability, on time, et cetera, actually increases the pace of innovation and the opportunity that the company has to deliver innovations to their end customers. But when we're talking about cloud, we have to separate the cloud native and the systems of engagement from the back office systems such as SAP, because really it's a transformation on the back end at the business process level, right? And many customers that I'm having conversations with, unless they're greenfield and going into SAP, they are choosing, of course, to go directly into the S4. But my customers who I'm talking to right now, they're still trying to position how they're going to make the journey over to S4. So the alternative that I'm offering my customers first is, let's just make it out to the cloud, right? And Virtustream runs a private enterprise cloud, as well as we have offerings on the hyperscalers such as GCP and Azure. And the first step out for my customers, let's talk about getting out to the cloud, right? And we have two types of models. The one is going to be lift and shift. And the lift and shift model is basically where you're taking the application as it stands today and moving it off of that legacy infrastructure into the cloud operating model, right? The alternative to that is the move and improve. And the move and improve talks about maybe re-platforming onto a different operating system, or even taking ECC and attaching it to a HANA database so that you can start to realize the benefits of HANA at the same time. And in Virtustream, because we have in-house a migration factory where we have performed over 3,000 migrations, those are the approaches that we've seen in 2020, 2021. And I anticipate we're going to see that in 22. And I second what Sherry has said, is that, that 2027 deadline is on the back of a number of customers' minds. So they're starting that planning at this point in time.
Great. Jessica, how is that correlating with what you're seeing with your customer interactions?
Yeah, I mean, very, very similar. And we're seeing more companies moving towards that transformation and accelerating stages of their digital transformation journey. And in our experience, the most critical projects that many SAP customers have conducted this year are related to kind of that re-platforming of their SAP landscape, specifically moving to the cloud. And a key factor in making the decision to perform really kind of this complex move has been the availability of things like automation, making the process easier and safer. And in regards to cloud, what we've seen in a lot of the research and a lot of the conversations we've had with customers is that hybrid cloud has really emerged as the most commonly used cloud strategy. And of course, the move to SAP HANA, S4 HANA has two different streams, right? You have the move to the digital core and the modernization and the integration of applications, which can start and run in parallel. So it's no longer SAP only, it's really SAP, non-SAP workloads kind of coming into this world together. And that's where a lot of our conversations are happening, figuring out, what are the best practices in doing that as they're looking to that move to 2027.
Yeah. Now, a question for you, because you mentioned hybrid cloud. Now, because I think this is a term that probably can get defined in a bunch of different ways. So when you mention hybrid cloud, what do you see typically customers doing in that hybrid fashion? Does that mean some workloads are on premise and some are in the cloud? Or does that like a combination of private and public cloud, or what are they typically doing?
I think it's kind of the gamut, at least from our experience. I think obviously a lot of customers are moving to public. We've actually seen customers move to public, then backtrack and move back to on-prem. I think overall, it's really just developing and building an environment that has the agility and the ability to go wherever they want to go. And also amongst different clouds, right? Some folks go someplace, they decide to go somewhere else a year later. So I think overall hybrid, at least in our minds and in our conversations, is really being able to have the choice. But what we've seen in terms of your question is kind of that mix between on-prem and public, depending on what they're trying to do, and also depending on where they're ready, right? There are some more conservative customers, there's more innovative customers. So it really depends on the customer and how they define that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and before I proceed, if you do want to ask a question for our panel, please feel free to go into the events area session and scroll down and find the live Q&A section, and you can type a question there, and I'll be happy to work that into the conversation with our panelists here today. But into what we're sort of seeing with SAP Insider's CIO research. We just published a report a couple of days ago, and the top driver of transformation in the enterprise, and I know this is something that I've had conversations with probably Lee and Sherry about in the past, is it's a business need for greater flexibility and innovation. And I think that's really what you were talking about with those hybrid cloud choices. Because I mean, more than 50% of the executives who responded to this survey said that that was their top driver for transformation. So what would you recommend for organizations as they make their plans for infrastructure investments in 2022 when it comes to increasing flexibility and the ability to innovate? So Lee, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Jessica and Sherry.
When it comes to cloud, just by its very nature, gives you that flexibility because the infrastructure was the underlying concern at a point in time, right? And similar to what Jessica is seeing, you have these different nebulous terms that people are using, and you have to go in and really qualify and ask discovery questions to understand and level set, well, what are we actually talking about today, right? Because as Jessica mentioned, when you talk about hybrid cloud, are we talking about an on-premise public cloud type of model, or are we talking about on-premises and then leveraging a SaaS type of play? Because technically, that would be a hybrid cloud or multi-cloud type of situation and solution, right? But one of the things that I would have to say, and one of the big advantages that is there today is with the clouds, is that you have access to an enormous number of services that allow you to monetize the data that you have both inside of your SAP system, right? And then when you can couple that data with what is there inside of the social environment, et cetera, the opportunity is there for the business to build up that intimacy with their customer, right? And because of the services that are available in the cloud, you have microservices, you have containers and Kubernetes and things of that sort that allow you to take advantage of the data, right? When I started with SAP, SAP was the mothership, and I'm going to age myself just a little bit, but I started in the not years where SAP was the center of the entire organization and everyone had to come to it. Now with what's available in these different platforms, SAP no longer has to be the center. You can create something like a data lake, and then you can democratize that data and share it with inside of the organization that then allows the business to do three things. So whenever I'm having a conversation with my customer, there's three topics that I would like to always approach is how do I help my customer to increase their revenue? That's one of the things. The second thing is, how is it that I'm going to help them to reduce risk, right? And one of the last things that I want to touch on is how do I help them to reduce their cost, right? Because Sherry had mentioned, and Jessica just the same, is that some of these workloads have moved out into the cloud, right? And then they have been repatriated, right? One of the different advantages is that when you're in the hyperscaler, is that you turn on something, nobody's watching the clock. And what I see is that companies are moving out into these operating models, a cloud operating model, and they don't have a governance structure around. And without that governance structure, they're not going to be able to realize the business case that they put out there so that they can reduce cost, right? So I would say one of the things that companies must think about as they're making this journey over to the cloud is make sure that they have the governance model and the operating model in place such that they can realize the business levers that they pulled in order to be able to get the project started.
Yeah, absolutely. Jessica, what do you think people should be prioritizing as they talk about for the infrastructure investments for 2022?
So I think here, the main point that decision makers and companies should really consider is to build on a solid foundation, right? Like make sure that the foundation you're trying to do this on is solid. Make sure you're on a platform where you can run the SAP workloads. It's a complete platform. It's easy to maintain, and it allows for that flexibility and for that innovation. So it's not a matter of pick and mix from different heterogeneous sources, but rather building a standard operating environment with all the pieces that you need, right? Of course, there's the operating system as the foundation of the platform. And then there's other components, as I mentioned before, adding in that automation, adding in the integration capabilities so that SAP systems can talk seamlessly with any other applications they need to communicate with, and a development platform. You mentioned Kubernetes. It's aligned with the needs of the developers and the latest trends, making it easy to create and test new applications fast to keep up with the market pace, right? So I think really making sure that you have that solid foundation that's going to allow you to innovate and do the things that you want to do, to not have to worry about keeping the lights on, right? Being able to put your resources and your dollars into getting to where you want to go, also getting to where your customers want you to go, right? And in order to increase that flexibility and ability is, super important. I think that's a solid piece you need to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Sherry?
Yeah, so I want to start, I agree with what has been said, so I want to add a couple more points. What I have seen is a lot of SAP customers started with one cloud. So they standardized on one cloud. But now AWS has been the pioneer in the cloud space, but now Microsoft and Google are all joining the game, right? They offer different programs. And if you talk to each cloud provider, they can tell you all kinds of advantages, why customers should pick that particular cloud versus the other. So I would say right now the trend I have seen is more and more customers start considering a multi-cloud strategy. So they like to be able to move their workload from one to another, given certain situations. So in that case, because each cloud offers very unique native services for the SAP workload. So for example, AWS offers Launch Wizard, and also they also provide some native SAP monitoring. Because this week I'm at AWS Reunite event, so they have some new announcements coming up. On the Microsoft side, they are also offering automation framework for SAP, and also the monitoring services for SAP. And Google are also offering similar services, and they also have some unique, for example, the MPR. To be able to isolate the errors in the memory level. So all those things are very unique, but I think the customer now had the advantage of being able to cherry pick the features that can help to enhance their landscape. So I would have to say that do your research, before you decide on one cloud, and just to take a look at what are the options. And whether you want to go with a single cloud or multiple cloud, keep in mind on all the options. And other advice is, if you want to go with a multiple cloud, then you want to avoid a vendor lock-in. Because when you have multiple clouds, the operations on each cloud would be different. Then it would add a lot of operational overhead if you rely a lot on the native services provided by the cloud vendors. So in that case, you may want to take a look at the services or solutions provided by the operating system. So for example, using a standard toolset to manage the life cycle of your SAP systems across multiple clouds, and using the standardized automation solutions provided by the OS vendor. So the point is then you can reuse one solution that you have developed, and with a minimal customization, you'll be able to reuse your asset in a different cloud environment. And also the standardization on the tool sets would allow you to streamline your business operation. So those add a lot of value. So those are the points to keep in mind. And also regarding reduced risk that Lee mentioned. So with SAP landscape, the zero downtime is so critical. And so I would encourage that you design a solid foundation before you start implementation. A common issue that I have seen is due to various reasons, the customer went live with the production, and then very soon the production system had outage due to a misconfiguration in the, for example, the cluster environment, and that has been surprisingly, right? You would think that a lot of testing should be done before go live, but with some cases, not enough testing has been done. So I would emphasize that before you go live, work with a reputable system integrator or a service hosting manager to design a solid landscape and do testing as much as possible, and think about all the corner cases. So in that case, we encourage you to engage with the provider of the HA solutions as early as possible. And there are a lot of tricks that we can help you to enhance your design and implementation before you actually go live. And another thing is reduce cost. So when you host your SAP landscape in cloud, so you have normally your two options: bring your own subscription or using the pay-as-you-go images. So do your research to find out the all the options you have. So because at operating system level, there are cost-saving options if you commit to long-term. So a typical scenario I would suggest is to start with pay-as-you-go images as your POC process, because it's easier to start a pay-as-you-go image from the marketplace across the multiple cloud providers. Do testing and wait for your workload to stabilize. And once the workload stabilizes, you have a better idea on the workload. At that time, it's time to optimize your cost. So you can talk to the provider to see if there is a long-term commitment discount. And sometimes, very often, the discount could be steep. So don't wait for too long, because otherwise you may get a shock on your first month's bill. So those are the points from my end.
Wow, quite a comprehensive list there, Sherry. But I mean, I mean, you did talk about multi-cloud strategies, and in our SAP Insider's recent enterprise cloud deployment report, we actually saw that when we asked people who are running workloads in the public cloud which public cloud provider they were using, very few were using just one. Now, I can't say that they're running the same SAP workload in multiple clouds, but I mean, at least they're using, for example, 50% of the people who are using Azure were also using AWS for at least some SAP workloads. So there's definitely a diversity, I think, in where people are putting their workloads, and they're looking for, flexibility. They're looking for choice when they make those decisions. Now, something, continuing that sort of conversation around the cloud, when it comes to the cloud, where have you seen organizations investing in 2021? And, where are they talking about investing in 2022? And, And obviously the cloud is, and what are they sort of saying is their reason for that investment? Jessica, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Sherry and Lee.
Yeah, sure. From a funding perspective, security, which is something I don't think that has come up, is a big one. Cloud management, cloud infrastructure. I would say those are, at least from our perspective and the conversations we've been having, kind of remain the top priorities for 2022. And we're seeing that the ease of management for their systems is definitely something that they're more and more interested in. Many companies are investing. This is something I've said over and over. I know Sherry was saying it too, cloud automation, whether it's at the OS level or whatever that might look like. Automation is such a key, and it's been such a huge topic of interest for our customer base. Really allows them to greatly reduce that downtime, as Sherry mentioned, kind of that zero downtime type of feel. And the time their IT team really needs to devote to system admin tasks just kind of reduces that and allows them to focus in that innovation area that they want to, versus just, again, keeping the lights on in the day-to-day. The other great big field of interest that we're seeing is everything related to data services and decision-making capabilities in the cloud that provide customers with tools to make better use of their data. Obviously, data is another big thing. Again, this is clearly related to the need for agility and focus on those relevant features when releasing new products. So, our customers are thinking, well, how can I, be more relevant for my own customer base, and the need to be agile, the need to be innovative, and release new products that are showing that is huge. So, all of that kind of ties into what they're looking at investing in to therefore, grow and see improvement for their own customers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Sherry?
So I echo what Jessica said. So right now we have a large population of customers who are already in the cloud. So they are looking for ways to further streamline operation and reduce the overhead on just keeping the lights on. So we've been helping customers to review what they have been doing to maintain their landscape. And also we are helping customers to, with new ways to reduce planned downtime, because in the day two operations, planned downtime is a huge headache for a lot of customers. And they try all means, right, to avoid that as much as possible. So they talk to us on the ways that they can leverage to help them. So another thing I mentioned is, another aspect is, how to get better use of the data, and also, how to create a cloud native applications. So in that case, the Kubernetes and the container is another focus area for a lot of customers. And very often I even ask, customer come to us and ask, can I put my application servers inside the container? It's going to make my operation and the maintenance life much easier. Then unfortunately, at this point, I have to tell them, you need to ask SAP. They need to hear the customer demand, right? And but I have seen this is a trend. So I think by working with SAP, if we can help customers to move more closer to the cloud native model, and I believe customer would fully embrace that direction.
Absolutely. Lee?
And Robert, I would just pick up on what Jessica and Sherry have already mentioned, right? Right now, the case has always been, when it comes to cloud, what am I going to do about security, right? And ransomware has been all over the news, and customers are concerned about whether or not if their data is going to be safe when it's with you in your environment. So can you tell me the controls that you have in place in order to make sure that my data is going to be secure with you, both when that data is at rest. So what type of encryption strategies do you have for when that data is at rest, but also what capabilities and tools are you using when the data is in transit as well. So those are the concerns that you have to have there. But one of the cases and points that we haven't really talked about is really what you had to provision for when you were running in your own data center, right? As an architect, I always have to talk in terms of availability. We've mentioned availability of the application, and I've implemented SAP with single global instances where downtime is always a concern, especially when you're running a SGI, right? So downtime is always going to be a concern, right? But you also have the operability, right? The maintainability, et cetera. All of these abilities that I learned when I was in architecture school about maintaining your application and making sure that the infrastructure would always be available. Now, when you're migrating over to a cloud, right? SAP, as Sherry mentioned, is not infrastructure agnostic, right? SAP, and as it runs today, it's going to be running on a single instance database, and it's going to have application servers that need to speak into that database, right? But there are opportunities for SAP to leverage some of these cloud native type of databases, where that risk is no longer going to be a concern that has to be accounted for. One of the things that Jessica mentioned is now you have the whole DevOps or DevSecOps pipeline that you have to be accountable for. Excuse me. There was a point in time where the developers would write the code, they would put it into the testing pipeline, and it would go into production, and no one really had to be concerned for that. But with DevOps now, the developers are also there and available and looking after the application because they're responsible for it as it's going into production just the same, right? The other piece of that is one of the things that we haven't really talked about in the SAP space, but how can you implement a CI/CD pipeline such that you're innovating faster and delivering changes and promotions into production at a faster clip, right? Traditionally, it's been in the SAP space that you would basically promote to production once or twice a week. Let's start having a conversation about how do we do that several times in a day, right? So that we're delivering that innovation that the business is actually going to need. And what I believe, and it's somewhat of a transformative statement, now IT has the front foot forward for the business, right? The moniker is there that every company is now a software company. And in order for every company to be a software company, that means that the technology department, IT, they need to be the ones who are leading the organization with all of these transformative opportunities that are there. And the final piece that I'll close out on with is that we have to start talking about how do we take the data that we have, all of the structured data that we have inside of that HANA database, right? But how is it that we start marrying that data with external data, such as social media data? Because I believe the companies that have the advantage are the ones who can get closer and build that intimate relationship with their customers, right? And now the opportunity is there for IT to have the front foot forward and be driving the strategy for the organization, because all of those tools are within our toolbox, and we've been dealing with those for many years.
Well, there's a lot to consider there for people. And, I think, there was multiple points raised there that we've seen coming up in SAP Insider research. For example, one of the biggest concerns executives had was something that Jessica mentioned, which is security, right? Securing your data, securing your systems, making sure that you have the right things in place. And then, Lee and Sherry, as you both talked about the foundation on which you're building things, and particularly the connectivity, we saw in SAP Insider research that 90% of the respondents to our research are integrating non-SAP and SAP systems. Very few people these days, I mean, perhaps different to when you and I started playing in the SAP space in the early 2000s, Lee, it was the center of everything. Now, I think it's often a central point of record for organizations, but they're connecting it to many other non-SAP systems within their environment, potentially from an analytics perspective, but also from just having best of breed solutions running. SAP may be the backbone, but organizations have to consider from a interconnectivity perspective how these systems and solutions are going to be speaking to each other. So I think we'll wrap up with this one last question. What do you think organizations should be doing today to prepare the infrastructure for driving transformation in 2022? Sherry, we'll start with you, and then we'll go to Lee and Jessica.
So I would say focusing on building a solid foundation to start with, and get transparency with all the infrastructures. So you want to understand the limitation and the advantages of your infrastructure, and so that the foundation can be built and you don't caught into surprise when issue arises, and also have a good relationship with the vendors in the stack, because there are multiple vendors that are providing solutions in the SAP space in the cloud. So do your research and build a stack, using the best combination, and also to ensure that you have a cohesive architecture. And again, another point is that, as I mentioned, is if you intend to go multi-cloud, build your multi-cloud strategy upfront, because if it's a fact, and there is a vendor lock-in aspect in each cloud, and that's what they intend to do with those native services. And so there are do your research. There are advantages of using the native services versus using third-party solutions if you intend to have a multi-cloud solution, because once you commit to one versus another, later on the change will be very expensive. And also automate as much as possible. There are so many automation solutions and the technologies on the market, and try to use the one that fits in your needs, and also come up with a long-term automation strategy. And I would say that almost right now you can almost automate everything. So be aware of and make informed decision. And one last thing is again insights, not just into the data. If you at the infrastructure level, there are a lot of monitoring solutions available at infrastructure level, and also into the SAP landscape. So use the monitoring that fits your business needs. In many cases, what we have seen is by using the right monitoring, you can avoid issues and avoid downtime, which is the ultimate goal for the SAP landscape.
Absolutely. Lee?
I would take a little bit of a different approach. I would say, I put on my enterprise architect hat, right? And Sherry was right. You want to avoid technology debt, because technology debt has a way of metastasizing on and of itself. Where you would have to start is, as an enterprise architect, you would have to have an application rationalization to understand, well, what application do I need to support the data models that I have? Right, I'm going to lean back on the fact that yes, automation has to be there. There's infrastructure management with Terraform, and if you're on Google Deployment Manager, but there are also configuration management tools such as Salt and Ansible and others, right? Because you have here that entire pipeline, right? The CI/CD pipelines, dev, business ops, SecOps, and things of that sort. But again, I believe at the end of the day, right now we're in the age where data is the new gold, right? and understanding the data that's within your four walls, but understanding the data that's outside of your four walls actually helps you to be that thought leader, that innovator in your particular market, because we go from data goes into information, and then information has to transform itself into knowledge. And how is that knowledge being used to make sure that your business is the leader in their particular industry?
Absolutely. Jessica.
Yeah, you know, these two covered it very well. You know, when we look at all the agility that's needed, the things we talked about happening in the market, the ability to use old and new, to automate, pulling things together, pulling multiple clouds together. You know, want to make sure that you have that infrastructure that can easily add to, deploy quickly, allows customers to be agile, it's secure, resilient. You know, infrastructure, for example, the operating system is not a sexy transformation tool, but I'd argue, for example, choosing an operating system provides consistency across environments. It is a strategic decision. Of course, bringing in an automation platform, it really provides a set of curated content, really helps with the transformation. So that's key as well. And so to really summarize, from my perspective, preparing by choosing that solid, reliable platform that can really run on any infrastructure to give you that consistency for development and operations across anywhere you want to deploy in your transformation journey. And I think from my perspective, just kind of closing out my thoughts here and listening to all of this is really bringing confidence to your team, the vast power that IT has these days for the overall impact to your company, right? Like pulling your team together, giving them that energy, giving them that confidence, just from a human perspective, outside of all this IT talk, I think just really bringing that energy to what a big difference you can make if you really kind of set the stage for providing that innovation and transformation. It's huge.
Well, some great advice there from our panelists. Thank you very much, Jessica Heath from Red Hat, Lee Johnson from Virtustream, and Sherry Yu from SUSE. You've had a bunch of great advice for our attendees, and thank you to our attendees at today's session for listening into our panel. We hope you got some valuable advice for your 2022 planning from this. Please feel free to reach out and connect to the panelists through the Event Air platform. There's an opportunity for you to do that if you have follow-up questions. We hope you're enjoying the event, and we hope you enjoy the remainder of your day and the sessions that you attend. So thank you again. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you for being here, and have a wonderful rest of the event.